Hi everyone, Professor Shipley here. As we start to move into issues of inequality, I wanted to take a chance to give you some definitions that we can work with and a little bit of data just to kind of set the stage. As you're moving into the readings for this week, as we get into All Souls, these things will start to be coming up more and more. So what I wanted to start you out with are basically some definitions. Let's begin over here with ideas of equality. So when we talk about equality in the American sense, we're usually talking about two different notions of equality. Sometimes we say equality, we mean one, sometimes we mean the other. Sometimes we have two people that are approaching the same topic, but they might be coming at it from different perspectives in terms of what we're thinking and meaning when we say equality. So, kind of the most conventional notion of equality, the one that we pick up in early childhood, right, is something akin to fairness. So, usually that's going to be like an equality of outcomes. So, when we say that we want people to be treated equally, we want them to be treated the same. Maybe you have a sibling, and growing up, you had to, share something. You had to share a cookie. So you'd break it in half, and of course, which half do you want? And if you've had a sibling, you of course know that you want the bigger half, because it would be unfair if your sibling got the bigger half and you got stuck with the smaller half. And before you say a half is a half, well, this is our issue of equality, right? We want the similar outcomes. We want the similar result. So kind of the most conventional notion of equality, the most intuitive notion, is that idea of equality of outcome, that everybody gets treated the same, everybody gets the same thing, do the same job, get the same pay, get the same rights, get the same vote. Everybody has the same result, would be equality of outcome. So the preference with equality of outcome is for similar results, even if that is discriminatory. So it doesn't matter who's older, it doesn't matter who's bigger, it doesn't matter who, what race or gender or anything like that. You should get the same pay, the same vote, the same treatment, the same rights, the whatever it may be. The preference is for the same. However, in the American sense, in the kind of our political sense, when we talk about equality, we are often talking about or using it as an idea of equality of opportunity. So the idea with equality of opportunity is that we're all playing the same game. We're all given the same starting point. We all should be playing by the same rules. And we are okay with it if some people succeed and some people fail. And you can succeed or fail based on whatever attributes might be out there. But this is built into the idea of the American dream, right? If you want to make it in America, you can. All you have to do is work hard, be smarter, be a harder worker, be better than the competition. And if you catch a lucky break here or there, all the better, right? That's just the way the market works. And the idea is of equality of opportunity is that we are okay if some people succeed and some people fail, so long as the game itself is played by the same rules and is played somewhat fairly. And you can start to see that there's going to be some breakdown here, right? If we want equality of opportunity, then we're going to have different results. We're going to have different outcomes. If we want equality of outcome, then chances are we're going to have to treat people a little bit differently in terms of how they play the game. We might have to shift some rules around to try to get a similar outcome in the end. Equality of opportunity and equality of outcome can sometimes be at odds. So equality of opportunity usually gets tied up with, a capitalist approach of markets and competition. Equality of outcome will often get tied up with, your more socialist ideas of we want to make sure people receive the same results. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way, and what you kind of find as you work through it is equality of opportunity and equality of outcome do go hand in hand. If you want equality of opportunity, if we want people to play by the same rules and play the same game, then chances are there's going to have to be some equality of outcome, not at the end, so it's not equality of outcome, but equality of starting point. So if we really want to say that everybody has the same opportunity, we're kidding ourselves in the modern American sense if we want to say that every community has an equally good school, and every student has an equally good shot of making it in America. There's different different situations and different things that we have to account for. So as you start thinking about these notions of equality, I think it's helpful sometimes to get the graphical version to kind of illustrate the ideas. So this is one of my favorites. The idea here is that for a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. So here's the exam, climb the tree. This is equality of opportunity, right? It's the same game. Everybody's playing by the same rules. However, we run into the situation where there are some of these animals that are never going to make it up that tree. The monkey, the bird have a distinct advantage, and that goldfish is just plain old SOL. It's not going to happen. Maybe the elephant just gets to go knock the tree over. It's not quite climbing to the top, but blow up the system sometimes and get your money there, elephant. So equality of opportunity, equality of outcome gives you a little bit of that perspective. Here we can make an argument. Both sides here, the left and the right, can be considered equal depending on your definition, right? So over here on the left, you're going to have, you can make the argument this is equality of opportunity. Everybody has a box. Everybody's going to get the same chance to stand on that box, whether they need the box or not. Some of them are going to be able to see just based on their natural abilities and the fact that, one of them is a grown adult and the other one's a little kid. Whereas if you wanted more equality of outcome, it's going to have to be a biased situation. Somebody's not going to get a box. Somebody's going to get 2 boxes to be able to see the game. You could flip it around and say equality of outcome is going to give everybody 1 box, and that's if you're wanting to make the socialist critique or the capitalist critique of socialism, everybody gets 1 box and people don't get what they need. You can make that as well. So different ways that you can kind of approach the same issue depending on the notion of equality that you're working with. My personal favorite, though, to illustrate the difference is imagine that I had a cake and I want to divide that up equally. So if I just say I want to equally divide the cake amongst everybody in class, there's 15 of us in this particular class that's no longer meeting. How wonderful. But if there's 15 of us, and I brought a cake the next time we all get together, and we want to divide that cake equally, how on earth would we divide this stupid cake? And your first inclination, right, is we ask how many people want cake, how many people are there here, how many people want a bite, how many people want a piece. 15 people want a piece. We just have to divide this cake up into 15 different equally sized partitions. I did you a favor. I made sure it's a round cake, so everybody's going to get the same amount of, side frosting, whether you want it or not. But we're going to cut this up into 15 pieces, and I'm going to dole it out. So there's our intuitive equality of outcome notion of equality. But if I wanted to set this up as equality of opportunity, it gets messier, right? So if I wanted to, based on a notion of equality of opportunity, if I wanted to divvy this cake up, it's going to get really crazy. So how am I going to do it based on equality of opportunity? Chances are it's going to have to come down to some sort of first come, first serve sort of situation, right? If I really want it to be the same game by the same rules and I want everybody to have an equal opportunity to get it, I'm going to have to do a lot of pre-planning on this whole thing. I might have to set up a situation where I make it known that at such and such time and at such and such place, I'm going to make cake available. Everybody is going to have the opportunity to arrive and receive a piece of cake based on your arrival. I might have some winners and losers, so I don't want to have too many regulations because this is the opportunity, not outcome. I don't want to regulate how much cake you're allowed to take. So really is first come, first serve, and if somebody, first or second person comes along and decides that what they need is an entire cake, there's not much I can do about that, right? You're going to have winners. You're going to have some people gain and some people lose out. What we're really trusting there is that people's good nature is that they're going to take a reasonable amount of cake and leave some for everybody else. At least that would be the hope. If I wanted to make it more fair, you can make an argument, right? Not everybody's going to have the same chance to make it to a class on time. If you have some obligation that keeps you away until right at the deadline, that might not work. You might be able to say, well, it's not really the same game. It's not really the same opportunity. Arguably, what I could do is I could set that cake in the middle of the room. I could draw a circle around it. I could make everybody, toe the line at the edge of that circle, and 1, 2, 3, go. First person to the middle gets, first come, first serve on the cake there at the middle. At that point, I can actually regulate to make sure that everybody is playing the same game and by the same rules. And it's going to be the fastest, the most devious, the person who's willing to throw a few elbows, who's going to make it to the cake at the end of the day. So you can start to get an idea. There's different ways that you can kind of approach the idea of equality and how you want to divide that stuff up. So equality of outcome, equality of opportunity are two notions of equality. There are more, but those are kind of the two main ones. As we get into these issues of equality and economics, and you'll get into it with All Souls and the idea of mobility, keep these kind of ideas in mind, because they are oftentimes kind of competing and sometimes contradictory ideas of equality within the American system. The other thing that's going to come up a fair amount are going to be ideas of economic and social mobility. So this is, how do we move up and down the economic ladder over the course of our lives? Two ways that we can think about that would be absolute mobility. So this is just, do we become more or less wealthy, or more or less economically successful over the course of our lives? So absolute mobility, are we doing better than our parents? Are we doing worse than our parents? Do we move up the economic ladder or down? We can adjust that for inflation, so that's easy enough to do. We can say, how much does our dollar buy us relative to our parents when they were making their income at about the same point in their lives and their careers? And we can talk about that either with income, how much are we making in any given year or per hour, versus how much wealth do we have at some arbitrarily chosen point in life. The idea of absolute mobility is oftentimes tied up with the kind of the rhetorical notion of the rising tide lifts all boats. So as the water rises, as economic prosperity grows, the assumption is often made that everybody benefits from that. Workers get a little bit more pay, or even if they're not getting more pay, advances in efficiency mean that we can buy more stuff and have more stuff with our dollar that we've earned. And we can do more with it. So as the economy is more successful, everybody else should be more successful as well. Compare that to the idea of relative mobility, which is not just are we better or worse off than our parents, because we might be better off than our parents, but that might not get us quite as far. We might be making more money, we might be able to buy more stuff with it, but relative to the rest of society, we might be moving down the economic ladder. I might make more money, I might have a nicer TV, I might have a nicer car, but I might still be, relative to those who are really rich or those who are really poor, I might be closer to poor or closer to rich than my parents were. So it's relative to the rest of society. So it's not just the tide and how high up we are in terms of the water, but what kind of boat we're floating on as well. If I have a yacht versus a rowboat versus if I'm, floating down the way in an inner tube, just struggling to keep my head above water, the rising tide is kind of irrelevant to me, depending on what kind of boat I happen to be in. So relative mobility is not just how much better or worse am I doing than my parents, but how much better or worse am I doing relative to the rest of society. So get those definitions, kind of the idea in your head as we kind of move on. I just want to give you some highlights of some data here to give you an idea, especially as you get into All Souls, of kind of what are we talking about in terms of change over time. So this is a chart, you've probably seen some version of this before. It's pretty popular, has been pretty popular. This goes up to the 2008 market crash. But this gives you an idea, going back to like the late 1970s, if we take 1979 as the 0 point. So share of income in the United States. So who has gained from the economic gains of the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s? And what you're going to see is we're going to break it down. Top 1% is the top line, then 20%, second 20%. So the top 20% would be the wealthy, the second 20% would be like upper middle class, the third would be middle class, fourth would be like working class, and the bottom 20% would be around the poverty line, honestly. So kind of the working poor and those who are in poverty. And the chart that you're probably caring a little bit more about is the one over here on the right, where you're going to see the change in share of income. So where is the wealth going as the economy has grown is pretty much exclusively to that top 20%. All the other four categories, so the bottom 80% of America actually lost out, generally speaking, over that, 30-year time period. Did not receive the gains. What do I want? I want this one here. So this gives you an idea of average hourly earnings. So this is going to account for inflation from the mid-1960s up through 2008. So you can get the idea. The average hourly earnings, so the average American was the most successful in the early 1970s. So in 2008 dollars, in 1972, the average American was bringing home $20 an hour. By the time you fast forward that to 2008, the average American was bringing home $18.50 an hour. So they lost $1.50 over that time period in terms of actual earnings. So they were earning a little bit less. You can tell that it had been lower than that. 1993 is going to be your nadir. And a lot of that gets helped as we actually adjusted the minimum wage coming into the 2000s. The other thing to account for here is that red line, which includes healthcare costs. So here's health premiums. So the average American today, if they are receiving healthcare benefits, their average wage, once you include those benefits, is up to $22.50 an hour. So that's going to be actually a better take-home pay than it would have been in 1972. Keep in mind, more and more Americans are not working jobs where they have any sort of healthcare coverage included. And that also speaks to the fact that the price of healthcare is growing greater than the rate of inflation. So what we're talking about there is, again, that relative mobility. I might be making more money, but I'm able to buy less with it. So my access to healthcare, I might be making more money, my access to healthcare might go down, even as I'm making more money, because healthcare is more expensive. And we have things where that is true for. So healthcare definitely growing faster than the rate of inflation. Higher education has been growing faster than the rate of inflation. The cost of houses has been going up greater than the rate of inflation. So it's kind of a double whammy for people as we talk about kind of from one generation to the next. If wages have gone down a little bit, plus healthcare costs have gone up, higher education costs have gone up, home ownership costs have gone up. So I'm not only just not making as much, but I'm able to buy less with it. That being said, I can get that fancy iPhone, kind of on the cheap. One last one that I want to give you. Let's do that one. So really what you care about up here is that green. So this goes back to the early 1900s. And then hits you up through 2006, 2007. And this is the ratio of the owner, CEO, or the top 0.01% of U.S. families and how much they bring in income versus the bottom 90% of U.S. families. So this is not rich versus poor. This is rich versus everybody else. So you go back to the post-World War II is that middle section, the mid-40s through the late 70s, and you do the rough cut there. CEOs, the richest folks in America, the top 0.01% were making about 200 times. So $200 for every dollar, let's say an average American was making. And that's, a big difference is 200 times. As you get up into the mid 2000s, last number up there is 2006, where it's 976 times more than the average American. So the top 0.01% was making $1,000 basically for every dollar you or I might have made. And actually, none of us who are listening to this are in that top, 10% or 89%. So realistically, they were making $1,000 for less than $1. They were making more than $1,000 for every dollar you or I were making. As far as American history goes, the last time it was that crazy in kind of the modern era would have been in the lead up to the stock market crash. That would have been the Roaring 20s and the lead up to the Great Depression. So, the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, reset a little bit of this, but we picked right back up with the same themes once you got out of the recession. So since about 2010, it's been a similar thing. Most of the benefits, just like back up here, most of the benefits have gone to the relatively wealthy. And that gets us into some ideas of mobility. So this is what you're going to see here is the probability or the percent chance that you are going to end up in any particular quintile, bottom, from bottom quintile, the poor, to the top quintile, the richest 20%. So where are you going to fall based on where you started out? So those that start out who are born into poverty or near poverty, those who are born in the bottom 20%, 57% chance that you're going to end up higher than your parents were. 36% chance that you're going to be also in the same quintile. You're going to still be poor, but make more money. Only 7% are going to be lower income and then a lower quintile. And you can kind of get the idea here. So upwardly mobile across all different quintiles, 35% of all families are going to have children that are going to move up in the world, and another 29%. So we're talking over half of people are going to do better than their parents were. However, you can still fall. Here's our relative relative mobility is that third line or that third row on the chart, where you're going to have 20% of people who are going to have a higher income than their parents, but relatively speaking are going to drop in terms of relative wealth. So they can earn more than their parents, but still, because of the way the economy has grown and where the wealth accumulates, end up drop from middle class to working class, even though they're making more money, just because of the way the economy has spread out the gains. And then you're going to have another 16% or so who are downwardly mobile, meaning they're going to be less successful than their parents. So let me break that out for you a little bit differently. So this gives you an idea. If you start out in the in what quintile, so the x-axis here is going to be your parents' income bracket. So you're born into whatever class level, and the percent chance that you're going to end up in any other given quintile. So if you're looking starting at the left, if you're born into poverty or near poverty, 43% of people who are born into poverty are going to stay in poverty for the duration of their life. So 43% or so are going to be stuck at the bottom. Only 4% of people who are born into at or near poverty are going to make their way to riches. They're going to end up in the richest 20%. So it's a 4% chance you're going to have that rags to riches story in the United States. The flip side of that, 40% of those who are born rich are going to stay rich. So they're going to never drop out of that category, whereas only 8% who are born rich are going to end up at or near the poverty line. So you can see there's a stickiness across all the categories. You're most likely pretty much to stay where you're at. The middle and upper middle are going to be kind of your little bit of variation there. But again, you're going to stay kind of in that middle zone. Once we do, that would have been for income. So here's wealth. And you're going to notice it's kind of equally sticky. So the chances of moving up or down the wealth ladder, so this is not how much money you're going to bring in a year, but how much do you actually own. If you're in poverty, you tend to stay in poverty. If you're well-to-do, you tend to stay relatively well-to-do. And the most common outcome is you're going to stay at the same level as you would have been in the past. This gives you some numbers that you can stick to it. So what you're going to see is parents' generation on one side. So this is wealth distribution from parents' generation to children's generation. And what you're going to see, parents' generation, the median wealth, household wealth, how much did they actually own? Homes, property, savings, all of that. For those who are at the bottom of the economic ladder, from parents to children's generation has actually dropped. This was that number that you were seeing earlier, where people have actually lost out as the economy has grown. So in modern money, we would have said the parents' generation would have had about $7,000 in savings, whereas the children's generation has around $3,000 in savings. The only categories where that's gone up has been in the upper two quintiles. So the rich have gotten significantly richer. The upper middle class has gotten significantly wealthier, whereas those in the middle class, lower middle class, or working class, and at the bottom of the economic ladder have lost out during that same time period. So that's all Americans. One of the things we know, going back to Ta-Nehisi Coates, is this is going to be a different story for different groups of Americans. Let me give you some numbers on the basis of race. One of the things you're going to find out is that Black folks are already going to be more likely to start at the bottom of the wealth, and both the wealth and the income distributions. We know for sure about family wealth in terms of just property being passed down and inherited. But family income ties in there as well. So you can see the black versus white percentage of people who are going to be raised in each quintile and have been raised with family wealth in each quintile. As you get into the comparison, red is white and blue is black. So of those who are born into any given quintile, where are their children or where are they likely to reach in their adulthood? So if you're born into poverty as a kid and you're white, there's a 1 in 3 chance that you're going to stay in poverty. There's a decent chance that you're going to rise out. So it's a 2/3 chance that you're going to be upwardly mobile. Whereas if you're black, born in poverty, it's a 53% chance that you're going to remain in poverty. It's a less than 50% chance that you're going to be upwardly mobile. And you can kind of, you can get the idea across the chart. If you're looking at the fourth and top quintile there and you're saying, but where are the black folks? There are not enough African Americans in America who are born into the top 40% of the economic ladder for us to even have reasonable data to be able to make that sort of evaluation. There's just not enough folks to do the percentages on there. So that's income ladder. Here is the wealth ladder for the same. And you're going to see fairly similar data here, that it comes with a particular disadvantage on the basis of race. Other people of color are going to face similar things, but the greatest disparity in America is still white versus black. And Hispanic and Latino tend to be kind of in the middle, in between. One more thing that I want to throw out for you for education. So here's college graduates. Let's do wealth. Actually, no. Graduates, usually we're talking about college. It's going to raise your income. So this is going to give you red as non-college graduates, and blue over here is going to be college graduates. So born into whichever quintile, plus get a degree versus don't get a degree, and what that distribution is going to be like. So if you're born into poverty, you don't get a college degree, 47% chance you're going to remain in poverty, whereas you get a degree, it's only a 10% chance that you're going to remain in poverty. The upward mobility is more significant. The other thing that's there is a payoff kind of across the board in terms of getting that education. The other thing that might be notable here is if you're born into the top quintile, if you're born wealthy and you don't get that college degree, it's not a huge percent chance that you're going to drop back down to, you're more likely to drop, but you're not going to go from riches to rags. So the rags to riches story is fairly uncommon. The riches to rags story is also fairly uncommon in the United States. Things tend to be pretty sticky at both the top and the bottom. That'll work in terms of giving you some idea of mobility. Let's do a little bit just in Texas so we can localize it a little bit. Income inequality has certainly grown in Texas. It continues to get worse. We're not the worst in the United States. That's typically New Mexico has the greatest amount of inequality. But we are growing in terms of our inequality in Texas. And Texas is usually, top 10 in terms of inequality between rich and poor. And what we actually do have in Texas is our rich continue to get much richer. Our poor continue to be poor. Our middle class is actually losing out at a quicker rate than much of the United States. So the gap between wealthy and middle class is continuing to grow wider in Texas as well. Sometimes we'll say, we can have a lower income in Texas because we have a cheaper cost of living, and that's true in a lot of the state. But no, there are a couple of counties in the northeast part of Texas there where they're green. Those are going to be the ones who have an above average cost of living, and that would be Dallas County and Collin County are the two that are up there. And then Houston, Austin, San Antonio is now a little bit above average in cost of living. So the cities in Texas do have a typically above average cost of living. That keeps getting worse, especially when you factor in housing and rent, because it's definitely pricey around here anyway to be able to get the housing costs paid for. This is going to give you an idea of just in Dallas. So if you're raised in the bottom fifth, if you're raised at or below the poverty line, the chances that you are going to be able to make your way to the top fifth to go from rags to riches is about a 6% chance in Dallas. That's better than we had at the national average, but still not great. As compared to other major cities, it's on the lower end. Whereas if you're raised in the top fifth, the chances that you're going to stay there is better than 1 in 3 shot in Dallas, which is again puts us about middle of the pack in terms of other major cities in the United States. So that stickiness that we see nationally exists in Texas as well. There's lots of ways that we try to deal with poverty, try to give the rising tide. You're going to come across a lot of them when you get into All Souls. One of the things we're going to ask you to do is to look at some of the ways that we can deal with some of these problems. Anti-poverty programs in Texas are relatively limited. They're relatively limited everywhere, but Texas, we make them particularly limited. This gives you an idea of TANF, which is typically what you'd think of as welfare. This is just straight cash that gets paid to folks. It's pretty significant limitations. You can only get TANF for a lifetime period of just a handful of years. So the idea that you just mooch off welfare for your life is not the case in the United States. It's not been that way since welfare reform back in the mid-1990s, although we still have the idea of welfare that comes from the 1960s and 70s. It's nothing like that anymore. So this gives you an idea. So if you're thinking of like a single parent with 2 kids, the maximum amount that you will be able to dole out to that family would be $277 in cash assistance. Let's keep that number in mind. 1 parent, 2 kids, $277. That's if they qualify. And then potentially they could have a SNAP benefit. That's going to be food stamps or your food benefit. 1 parent, 2 kids, $497. That's not going to be in cash. That's going to be in food aid. So $500 plus another $270, so $770 is the maximum amount potentially per month for one parent, two kids. You better hope those kids are in school, because I will attest that you can't pay for daycare with that, not much of anything else. So what's the maximum amount of income that you can have and still qualify for benefits? That's what's over here. So this is before taxes or anything like that. For that single parent with two kids, anything below $2,680 a month is going to qualify for maybe some benefits, not going to be maximum benefits, but some benefits. And you get an idea of where food stamp usage is highest. Here in Collin County, it's below average, but you can definitely kind of see in Texas where the wealthier areas are, and the areas that have a lot more folks who are struggling. So this has just been kind of a quick look at some of the issues of economic inequality. I wanted to give you these terms so that we can have some common ground in the discussion, a way to conceptualize your ideas, and also to just put into perspective kind of what it is that America is facing in terms of the economic breakdown and stratification. Like I said, this stuff is going to get worse over time because, and not necessarily worse over time, but a lot of this data is going to be thrown for a loop because of the current situation. We've got what it was basically a Great Recession amount of change that's all happening just in the course of these couple of weeks with all of this COVID-19 stuff. And it's about to get real messy for the foreseeable future. So I'm sure we're going to be talking a lot more about these equality issues in the real world over the next year or two or three or four. We've been talking about them over the last few years here as well. So with that, I'm going to sign off. Stay healthy, y'all. Stay safe. And until next time, have a good night.